Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Cole Butler, and I'm a counselor in my therapy practice here called Cole Butler Therapy. I also run a community for mental health providers called Integrative Care Collective, and you can join if you're a mental health provider in a private practice or small group practice, and it's totally free. I talk about psychedelics, science, philosophy, health, consciousness, religion, and spirituality, and really the changing paradigm of mental health care in Western society. So if you're interested in those things, I encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for being here. My topic today is on reconnecting society. And so I brought this up last week in some clips, and there was some people that were a little unclear about, what I was talking about, especially in terms of connection. Because I think that we don't normally think of ourselves as disconnected from ourselves. We think, okay, well, maybe I'm disconnected from other people, but surely I'm connected to my own self, right? Like, what does it mean to be disconnected from oneself? And I think to understand that, you have to start to think about what your true self is. And are you living in alignment with your true self? Are you living on the path that you want to be on? Or are you just going through life and maybe you don't believe that there's a path for you? Maybe you don't believe that, there's a predetermined path that you're supposed to be following and you're not on it. Maybe you don't believe that there's a greater self, that there's a part of you that is bigger than you. I do think there's a part of each of us that is bigger than what we see and maybe how we show up day to day. And that's our true self energy. And I believe that we get to decide whether to be in that true self energy or not. And that we do have a path that we're supposed to be on, but it's up to us to choose to walk on that path or not. Now, those are some of my assumptions that you have to make to start to understand, what I'm talking about when I talk about disconnection. So from a broader sense, in Western society, we have largely lost our connection to God or something divine, the universe, something greater than ourselves. And Friedrich Nietzsche talked about this in the late 19th century through this beautiful and super powerful quote, which I'll read, and it is, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?" So he wrote that in a book called The Gay Science. And I think people took the very first sentence from that, "God is dead," as this triumphant thing. But the way I view it when you read that full quote is that it's a tragedy. God is dead, and we have killed him. And what does he mean by that? What did he predict? He predicted that this notion of the divine would be lost on us, and that we're going to live in a world without this larger light, without this guiding force. And that's where we're at today. And it's led to this big belief in nihilism. So nihilism basically being the belief that life is totally meaningless, and that goes hand in hand with atheism, with the lack of spirituality, and what I talk about as materialism as well. So if there's no greater spiritual reality, if there's nothing larger than ourselves, if what the world is comprised of is just material physical objects and then the basic Newtonian laws of physics, then we're not left with much else, right? Like, you just have stuff and there's no path, there's no greater spiritual world to wander through. And what's coming up right now is also just quantum mechanics and other ways of looking at physics. And physics is not like, okay, we have like Newtonian mechanics and this like really rigid, like the apple falls from the tree, I push on something, it pushes back view of reality. We got that, and that opened up a huge amount of technological advancement and societal progression. But quantum mechanics is now showing us that there's a lot more than meets the eye, and there's a lot of spiritual weirdness that emerges with that is fundamentally incompatible with the Newtonian mechanics view of physics. Like, the most simple example that gets thrown around is that light is either a particle or a wave, and for Newtonian physics to make sense, it needs to be one or the other, but under quantum mechanics, it behaves like both. And so when you look under the hood, there's this element of it could be either one at any point in time, and essentially when that is measured, it can be determined to be either one or the other, but it can exist in a superposition state of being either one of those things. So, the whole idea of superposition states, and that we essentially, it looks like we have to look at something and observe it for it to become one thing or the other, opens up a lot of weirdness, opens up a lot of incompatibility with this Newtonian mechanics view of the world. And from what I know, and I took some courses on this in college, is that we don't understand what happens at the smallest level, right? And so there's still a lot that we don't understand. And so when we talk about this notion of materialism dominating, it actually is an incomplete worldview if you take like a hard science view of reality. If you take physics to be like the ultimate dictator of how the world works and the rules, then you have to almost include a strange spiritual element when you look at the quantum mechanical reality and the quantum mechanical framework. And so anyway, that's all to say that we have to leave room for spirituality in our view of the world, and you're actually not getting a complete worldview by saying what we can see and measure is all that there is. You're actually taking what we have seen and measured and extrapolating that, therefore that is all that there is in the world. But it's actually an incomplete view, because if you take what we have and what we don't have, then there's the whole thing, right? These are the things that we can see and measure and know, and these are the things that we can't. And if like you just take this out of the equation and say these things that we know and measure must comprise all of the world, and then I'm going to add those into my worldview, well, you're actually just filling in this unknown space with what is already known and denying yourself any way of accessing or looking at what is greater than. And so there's a lot of mystery in this other side, and I get the desire to not want to fill that mystery space with conjecture or something that is very loose or something that is not grounded in like a really rational viewpoint that has not been arrived at by serious methods of scientific inquiry. But some things we cannot get to simply by using the scientific method, scientific measurement. Like the way that I look at it is that the scientific method and science is this incredibly powerful tool that allows us to have this great degree of control where we say, I'm going to get rid of everything that, or I'm going to hold constant, rather, everything that I can. I'm going to control every tiny little thing, every variable. And I'm going to find the one thing that I can manipulate, right? The independent variable. And I'm going to tweak that, and then I'm going to run a test. And I can look at that little thing that I tweaked and apply my thing and then see what changes and then make inferences about how the thing that I tweaked operates in the world. And by doing that over and over and over again, applying the methods of statistics to show probabilistically that thing reliably occurs, and then doing that in several different studies, and then looking at all of the studies, you can kind of start to see, okay, we know with a high degree of certainty that, when this thing happens, we see this result. And that's great. And that has progressed us so far. But there's also things that don't work that way, that just do not fit into that very clean, neat box. Like dream interpretation, for example, just one example, where I might have a dream that is very meaningful to my life, and if I can unpack that and understand it and use it to make my life better because it gives me this extra layer of insight into my life, then that's useful and that's great. But there is no way to plug dream interpretation into that scientific model that I just described of hypothesis testing, because dreams and their interpretation are so unique to the individual that you don't get to make this taxonomy of different symbols and how they operate in dreams and have this very clear logical view of what a specific thing in a specific dream means. While there may be some universal elements, there's also a lot that is really, really specific to the dreamer's life. And that's just one example. And so, I think the human ego and the human mind and the human intellect latches on to this scientific method because it brings this whole level of legitimacy, and anything that sounds mysterious or spiritual or woo-woo or even religious is like easily thrown out as problematic, and well, we can't really know that, and so you're just guessing, and so how do you really know? And we want to be right? We want to be seen as legitimate, and entire fields of study are like that, right? Like psychiatry and psychology have fought so hard to be seen as equals in the scientific realm that we've adopted this framework and we've thrown so much useful stuff out in the process about how the mind and the psyche work. And we have to get back to a place of reintegrating those principles and saying, look, there is physical stuff that you can measure and that matters. Like, it matters that, there's operant conditioning and classical conditioning, and I need to understand those things to understand, how I'm acting and feeling and behaving in the world. But I also need to understand more subtle spiritual factors. So that's my kind of rant on scientism, and sort of with that, atheism and nihilism and materialism, because I think all those go hand in hand. So, the atheist viewpoint essentially is that there's no divinity because we cannot measure it, we cannot know it through the tools and the methods of science, and so, I don't want to be seen as one of those wackos who relies on this, really shaky information that can't be measured. I'm a serious person, I'm a smart person, I'm an intellectual person, so only those things that I can prove are going to be the things that I fit into my worldview. And then with that, if you live in a world that is dominated by only what can be seen and measured, and fits into this materialistic paradigm, and everything else is thrown out as wacky, then essentially there's no room in there for meaning and a greater spiritual truth and living a life of meaning and purpose. At least in my view, and let me know if you think differently, but I think that can be really harmful and really difficult. And that was essentially Nietzsche's point, was that, we don't have God anymore to look up to. What the hell do we do about that? And he came up with this idea of the Ubermensch, or Overman, or Superman, as basically the highest version of yourself. Like, I should look at what the best version of myself would do in this situation and strive toward that, and then in his sense become your own God. And then that's kind of become existentialism, and existentialism is about creating your own meaning, right? So, and maybe, you don't need spirituality for that, but it's essentially the view that, I need to make my life meaningful. And when you make your life meaningful, you feel better, right? Because you're actually contributing, and you're helping, and you're making the world a better place. And I think that we need that desperately. We need to be helping each other out. We need to be building each other up. We need to be making a difference in people's lives. So for me, spirituality and living a meaningful life go hand in hand, because the meaning that I contribute to the world is my spiritual purpose here. And so when I talk about losing connection to oneself, I mean losing connection to that path of meaningfulness, of what I should be doing, of the difference I should make in the world with my time on this planet. And so I think that because we have lost this image of God in society, we have filled in his image with basically false idols, false belief systems, the atheism, the scientism, the nihilism. And so we've lost access to something deeper within ourselves, which is fundamentally divine and spiritual, which is our guiding light, which brings us to an understanding of how we should be moving forward, and a relationship to self. And so, my cosmology is that the psyche is contained with both the conscious self and the subconscious self, and then that there's the greater collective unconscious self, and of course, the greater consciousness of the interwoven web of humans and animals and plants and fungi and the ecosystem and the way that all weaves together. So I think that we have to find a way back to our own individual spirituality. We don't have religion to guide us anymore. That institution has been crumbling in our society, offered a manual and a path and directions for how to live a spiritually fulfilled life, how to be a good person, morality, what to do, what not to do, what happens after you die, what happens when you do a bad thing and you sin and you want to get back on the good path. All of those things were provided to us in the context of Christianity, at least in Western society. I'm not as informed on other religious beliefs, but they all essentially provide us a framework for our spirituality and our spiritual connection, and we don't have those anymore. So people have been left to create their own framework and to figure out how to have their own spirituality, how to connect to themselves. And that's really hard to do. I mean, I think about it all the time, and I have been for a really long time. Like, what are my spiritual beliefs? And so when people call themselves spiritual, I think that, these are spiritual seekers who have sought out their own truths and have tried to figure out their own way to make sense of the world, and have tried to figure out, what do I do when the institutions of religion have failed me, but I still believe in something greater than myself. And you have to look at all kinds of different places to try to find an outlet for that, to try to find a manual, to try to find somebody who's going to tell you what to do. But I don't think you can just live without it. I think that when you don't have that connection, then you might not think it, but you do adopt your own views about the world and your own thing to follow and worship and to guide you. And that can be all sorts of things. It can be a person, it can be a belief system, an ideology. But fundamentally, we have to start first with what is our own true self, what is our connection to the divine. And I think that psychedelics can help with that. I think that there are many ways to connect with your spirituality, with or without psychedelics. I hope that psychedelics can be the thing that helps us get reconnected, because people reliably have mystical experiences and religious experiences. People have, this connection to something greater than themselves, this sense of unity and connectedness, and say, oh, I'm a part of a larger whole, of this greater oneness, this noetic quality, oceanic boundlessness. These are things that have been discovered in the research in the Mystical Experience Questionnaire and through a lot of the work at Johns Hopkins University about mystical experiences under psychedelics. And these are also associated with clinical improvements in mental health. So people get better and they take care of themselves better when they have these experiences. So I think we're at a time when things are really tense. At the time of this video, we're right in the middle of the Trump and Kamala Harris election campaign. It's in like 2 months we'll have to vote, and people are now talking about World War III, with the US sending nuclear missiles to Ukraine to point at Russia, and obviously we have the whole Israel-Palestine conflict going on, and Ukraine-Russia war, of course. And so, things are really tense, and people are really disconnected, and I think people kind of are falling into two ideological camps, which is essentially, the diversity, equity, and inclusion people, and then you have like the conservative, like American, like nationalist people, and these two camps can't talk because like they're each like super embedded in their own ideological belief system. And I think that there's nuance, right, to be discovered in between those two camps, but the problem with ideological identification is that any threat to one particular belief system can crumble that whole belief system. Right? If one piece does not align with the rest of the belief system, then every piece is called into question. And if every piece has to be in its right place for that belief system to exist, and one piece is wrong, then all the other pieces could be wrong too. And then what that could lead to is a total breakdown of your whole belief system, of your whole ideology, of your whole worldview. And that can be quite dangerous, because then what do you turn to? Like, where do you look for direction and guidance? And that can leave you in a spiritual crisis, because now you don't know what to believe anymore. And I think that can happen regardless of like what your belief system is. And and then you have to restart from the beginning of forming your own belief system, or evaluating all these different ones to find a good one. And that's really scary. But I think, if we hold God at the center of our reality, and we try to see the goodness in other people, and we have conversations with others that are difficult, and we're trying to figure it out, and we're not like bought into one ideology and closed off to anything else, then we can start to figure these things out as a society and a culture and come together again. So yeah, I think that psychedelics can be a catalyst for that. I think that they can be a spark, but we have to do that work internally as well. I think that people are dissatisfied with the status quo. We are extremely unhealthy, and we're trying to get back to a place of health and unity and oneness. And I do think that we will find that through community, through connection with nature, through connection with others, through connection with ourselves. But we have to work at it, and we have to get there. So let me know what you think in the comments. If you like this video content, consider subscribing for more, and giving it a like. Thank you very much.